And it's that transparency that would have avoided the billions and billions lost to our economy at the hands of your Fianna Fáil government. Let's not forget, because nobody in this House has forgotten, and believe you and me, nobody outside of this House has forgotten either. This evening's private members' bill comes with an unpleasant odour of irony by Fianna Fáil, given their track record in dealing with our banks. We all know that this private members' bill is nothing more than a cheap attempt by Fianna Fáil to gain any political momentum, given their continuous becalming in the polls. And what they don't realise is that the electorate are far more sophisticated today than we were post our crash 2010-2011. And we had that little thing in the side of their wages slips every single week called the dreaded USE that's a constant reminder of the legacy of the money, the taxpayers' money that Fianna Fáil robbed of every single working person in this country to pay for the bailout, the biggest bailout, or remind me, I think Fianna Fáil said at the time it probably was going to be the smallest, cheapest bailout. Well, that's seriously backfired. To conclude, Count Corla, in 2011, this government pledged to wind down Anglo and Irish nationwide. This is currently underway in a way that will strengthen our economy and safeguard us from any future crisis. And I fully support the Minister for Finance's appointment of the IBRC Special Liquidator to review, report on all transactions, activities and management decisions in a very timely manner, and further welcome his appointment of the retired Judge O'Neill to monitor that review. When the report is issued, we will all see that the person that Fianna Fáil chose to put in charge of the wind down of IBRC, because of his legacy of putting the country before his party, because of his integrity, there will absolutely be nothing to see when this report is issued in August. Thank you, Ciara.
Deputy Tom Barry, the Deputy has 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ciara. Look, I've listened to all this debate tonight, and it's quite astonishing, actually, at times, the level of detachment. Fianna Fáil bring up this tonight, and I really wonder. There's allegations being cast here, and I mean the facts of the matter are, the Minister met with the IBRC. They assured him, under the old framework which Fianna Fáil put in place, there was no monetary threshold if something was being sold. The IBRC were mandated to orderly run down what was the old Anglo. And wild accusations are taking place tonight because values or sufficient values were not received. And I'm just wondering here, what do you think a liquidator does? They actually wind down institutions, and they do it for more than usually, for less than the value that you expect. Now, the only remnants I can see here tonight are people saying that there were so-called foreign investors. Well, I don't see any of them jumping up and down at the moment. The thing we have here is, when the Minister saw that there was Siteserv was sold or being sold, he decided to monitor this and to look for a new relationship framework, which is important because he wanted to be part of how this decision-making was made. It's a huge improvement, and I can't see why criticising the Minister's anxiousness to make sure everything is done properly is a fault. Allowing a situation where a minister would not be briefed, which Fianna Fáil were in charge of, is not right. And remember, the IBRC have fiduciary responsibility here. You know, they must make sure that what they're doing is correct and is within the law. And also, one of the first bills I remember when we came into government was the white-collar crime bill. And that was put into place because of all the mess that was Anglo. If I remember correctly, there were certain places in it where it even had to go down and mention passwords had to be given to people because there was no cooperation at all for the people trying to dig out what was a mess that Fianna Fáil created. The Minister has also said, with his special liquidator being appointed here, he is confident that they'll get to the bottom of this. Justice Iarla O'Neill is presiding over any conflict of interest that may occur, which is important because people will have faith in the fact that we are doing a review here that will actually be credible and won't cost the country a fortune also. However, when that review is over, the Minister has not ruled out any further action, which leaves the door open. Let's come here, let's see this review, and let's judge it on its merits. He also has said that this review will be presented to the Finance Committee, of which I'm a member, and I'm sure we'll all have something to say about it. So I feel we should wait, Let's see what's happening. Let's see the facts of the matter here before charging and making wild accusations, which have been made here tonight. It's been absolutely unbelievable. Accusation after accusation thrown at the government in order to make political gain. It cheapens this House. It most certainly does not help. And when people are out there giving the aspersions that there's something wrong being done, when they have no proof at all to back it up. And when I look back to it, and it was something that affected most of us in this country back along, when the Fianna Fáil government shut down the sugar industry, and I hate to bring it up, but we had a golden share. No one of you were shouting for a review there. No one of you were saying what went wrong. It absolutely broke the backbone of where I live. And you're making a major jump and dash here for foreign investors. Why didn't you do it for the people who are making a living in the indigenous industry that she actually ruined, that she got rid of? Thank you. Also, there's been allegations about KPMG, which in essence says that they can't do their job, but also is a slander towards the Judge O'Neill, who is there to make sure that everybody's role is respected. It is incredible. The House tonight is being used as a platform for allegations. Let's throw enough mud. Let's see if something sticks. You're mixing up also the liquidation process with mortgage evaluation. And yes, we have a terrible mortgage crisis. Guess why we have a terrible mortgage crisis? Because Fianna Fáil were in government for a long time. And I know you've apologised for it and all that. However, don't be mixing up trying to deal with mortgages with liquidation process. They're two separate items. In conclusion, I look forward to this review being done. I look forward to it being presented to the Finance Committee. And certainly at that date, I look forward to us discussing it once more. And I am sure at that stage, if all the facts are there and if the Minister's assurances which have been given are correct, there will be no more to say on this matter. And until that, I will reserve my judgment also. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Martin Hayden, and the Deputy is 4 minutes.
Just to break down tonight's private member's motion in simple terms and in summary from what I could take of it. The Fianna Fáil motion basically says that there are questions to be asked of how IBRC handled the sale of Siteserv and other sell-offs. Fianna Fáil failed to mention that the sale of Siteserv was carried out under a relationship framework that their government introduced and set up. Fianna Fáil are saying that the framework that they set up for how IBRC and the Department of Finance would engage was in some way deficient. Fianna Fáil motion relates to a breakdown of trust between department officials and those on the board of IBRC. Surely a decent framework agreement, if properly established, would transcend any personalities involved. The summary then of the government counter-motion is the department had no role in the sale of Siteserv under the old Fianna Fáil framework. This government introduced a new, more robust framework to replace that of the previous government. Given the public concerns, Minister Noonan has directed the special liquidators of IBRC to review all transactions, activities and management decisions which occurred from nationalisation to liquidation under the monitoring of retired High Court Judge Iarla O'Neill, should there be any actual or perceived conflicts of interest. It's important that in the context of this debate we also remember that it was the previous Fianna Fáil government who pumped €34 billion of taxpayers' money into Anglo, which we the taxpayers will never see again. This is Fianna Fáil government whose leader and then Taoiseach played golf with Seanie Fitzpatrick, the head of Anglo, in mid-2008, when rumours were circulating of the bank's demise, and apparently never asked how's business, how's things going. And when word of this golf game came up, there was a suggestion that maybe the then Taoiseach was aware and stuck his head in the sand. But apparently it was a far greater thing for us to be reassured to know that the then Taoiseach at the time never asked that question when concerns were rife around the area. People say, what would Fine Gael have done if they'd been there tonight at the bank guarantee? And I want to say one thing for sure. I would have hated as a public representative to be in that room, having to make any decisions with the gun to the head, like was the case, that would have such massive conflict and knock-on implications for the future of the country. But one thing I'm damn sure of, if Fine Gael had been in power, that night would have never came. Because we would not have had our heads in the sand like the previous administration. The period of light touch regulation and lazy governance cost this country's citizens a huge amount, and much more than just in monetary terms. We've since seen the prudent management of our state's finances by Minister Noonan and Howland, helped in no small way by the perseverance of the public. Already this government has succeeded in reducing the interest rate on the European loans provided under the bailout programme, securing agreement to extend the maturity of European loans, replacing the promissory notes with very long dated government bonds, and replacing just over 18 billion of IMF loans with cheaper market-based funding. This government reduced borrowing requirements by €50 billion over a decade, including 10 billion in cash savings. IBRC, the wind-down vehicle of Anglo and Irish Nationwide, was liquidated as part of the deal to restructure the owner's promissory notes. We don't hear promissory notes talked about anymore because they've been taken out of the vocabulary.
Leave 1 minute.
Promissory notes that we inherited from this government. Restructuring led to stabilisation of public finance and a clean exit from the bailout without a precautionary credit line. Fianna Fáil have a neck to criticise one of the many messes that they left this government to clean up under their own framework structure. Rest assured, the public can have full confidence in this government when it comes to the handling of matters of a financial nature where the state is concerned. Our track record in restoring the public finances over the last 4 years is proof of that. And if Fianna Fáil did one good thing in the past, they appointed a man of integrity with a fantastic track record of service to this state over IBRC to see the wind down. And I have no doubt in carrying out the fiduciary duties that Alan Dukes and the board of IBRC did. They did so with great integrity. And I expect her to be nothing to see in this matter. But Fianna Fáil want a full inquiry that will take years and cost the taxpayer far more. This Fine Gael government has basically offered a quick investigation that will report by August. We know what previous inquiries, how much they've cost, how long they've gone on for, that were initiated by previous Fianna Fáil governments. And the one thing we know from this motion tonight, that is if Fianna Fáil were to get back into power, we could just expect more of the same into the future. Thank you, Colonel.
Thanks, Deputy Brian Walsh, and the Deputy's 3 minutes.
3 minutes. I thought a little bit more about that. But anyway, look, it was very difficult tonight listening to Micheál Martin and his colleagues in Fianna Fáil pontificate to us and criticise earlier this evening. And we'll be very clear here, the only reason that we're debating this issue tonight is because the Minister changed the relationship framework put in place by Fianna Fáil. Under the Fianna Fáil negotiated relationship framework, there was no requirement for the board of IBRC to consult with the Department of Finance or with the Minister, and it was extremely difficult for the department to investigate any transactions. So make no mistake about it, we wouldn't be here debating this issue tonight had the Minister not strengthened the relationship framework which allowed him to go in and look at these issues. And he went a step further in actual fact, and he decided to avail of the new relationship framework that he put in place to retrospectively investigate the decision of the board of IBRC, a board in actual fact that was appointed by Fianna Fáil, by Micheál Martin and Brian Cowan and that cabinet at the time. So the criticism of Minister Noonan that I listened to tonight is entirely unjustified, unwarranted and unfair. Second point, the mention tonight by Fianna Fáil about the 105 million of losses on this particular transaction, and yes, 105 million is a considerable amount of money, but there was no mention of the fact that that was 105 million of 34 billion euro that was lost by Anglo/IBRC under Fianna Fáil's reign of office and under the catastrophic mismanagement of the economy that the Fianna Fáil government oversaw. And do they not realise that the commercial reality of the case, the fact is that an awful lot of losses in banks have been created because the banks decided to dispose of assets at a figure far below the actual value of the asset, a value of the loan, and that's what created the losses. And that's
Deputy,
why
you have 1 minute.
Fianna Fáil had to introduce the bank guarantee. That's why they had to create the bad bank NAMA to crystallise the losses in the Irish banks. And you know, they came in here speaking on a motion, on a private member's motion last week on mortgage arrears, and they were very critical of the government that it isn't, you know, forcing the banks to write off mortgage debt for individuals who were caught in the spiral of rising house prices. And rightly so, they were right to ask the banks and force the banks to do that. But when the same principle is applied to commercial entities, as is the case here, they're extremely critical of the government. So look, I thought I had more time. I just think that the debate tonight it's very unfair, the criticism of the Minister. He acted prudently when he strengthened the relationship framework, and as I said earlier, that's the only reason that we're here tonight discussing this, is because he did strengthen the relationship framework, which allowed departmental officials and the Minister's office to investigate these type of transactions. So,
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Andrew Dáil, and the Deputy's 3 minutes.
Thanks, Cahir. I just welcome the opportunity to speak briefly on this. I suppose, like yourself and Deputy Micheál Kitt, we were here in 2008 when this the infamous night of the bank guarantee came to pass. And to recall it just for very quickly, we were all, I would say, overwhelmed with shock, and to a certain degree panic, but nonetheless trying to salvage what was a disastrous position. And it's ironic that in another part of this House we have an ongoing inquiry into the whole banking crisis, which was cynically being regarded cynically by some people opposite when it was being established. And I think it's proven to be a very effective method, and it's to commend to the credit of all members of that committee that it's carrying out its function so diligently. Following on from the bank guarantee, I suppose, was the establishment of the IBRC and the 34 million of money that was pumped into it, with the obligation of the IBRC of redeeming as much money as that as possible in the interest of the taxpayer. To go on to the chain of events, and they're all very well documented. At the time that the concerns were presented in 2012 about the sale of Siteserv, the civil servants could have done what civil servants are sometimes accused of, as could the minister, and said, well, this is the relationship that was set up, I can do nothing. Instead, there had been, the minister acted, the department officials acted, and it would be interesting to know that when the relationship arrangements were being set up in July of 2009, were the department officials in the Department of Finance, senior officials, given any opportunity to express a point of view on this? Because it would seem to me that they were told this is the way it's being done. I don't have any proof of that. I can understand to a certain degree the rationale was to keep arm's length, for very good reason, of the workings of the IBRC from any political interference from any minister of the day. So what has happened instead is that the minister and his senior officials took an active and concerned interest in what went on, sometimes heated, and on foot of a review in June of 2012, got assurances from the then CEO and the chairman, who have a fiduciary responsibility and had to take the responsibilities seriously. We now move on to what is probably going to be a very quick and efficient method of trawling through the records, overseen by a reputable former member of the bench. And if there is anything that comes out following that, then let's have a full inquiry. But what's the point in kicking something into an inquiry that won't have a result until this time next year, maybe beyond it, at its considerable cost, when the facts are quite clear? And any facts that have been raised as a matter of concerns are those that were actually presented and divulged by the Minister and his officials. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Michael Kitt, and the Deputy is 5 minutes.
Look here, and I'd like to welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion, and indeed I'd like to commend Deputy Sean Fleming. Thank you. Just could I commend Deputy Sean Fleming at the outset for proposing this motion calling for an independent commission of inquiry to examine the circumstances surrounding the sale of Siteserv and other company sell-offs by IRBC. And just listening to some of the government TDs, I'd just like to remind them that when public meetings are taking place now, I find throughout my constituency, whether the issue is crime or housing or agriculture, education or health issues, people are beginning to raise questions about the shortage of money for various projects, and people are beginning to say, what about the taxpayers' loss of 105 million for Siteserv? And yes, the bank guarantee has been mentioned, as has been said, but I think if I was to tell people at these meetings that the problem is the relationship framework, or that indeed the Minister was going to change the relationship framework, I think I'd be laughed out of court. And I'm sure that's the reason government TDs aren't referring to the relationship framework when they attend public meetings. But just to give an example, clearly, last night I attended a meeting with my colleagues in East Galway in relation to a proposal for a new school, a new primary school in County Galway, a school that was looked for over 15 years ago, and indeed has been twice on the list for construction, has been twice taken off. something I think that might merit an investigation on its own, that issue. And people did raise the issue of funding because funding is needed and the money that's going, unfortunately, that the taxpayer has to fork up in relation to Siteserv. The fact of the matter is that very clearly in 2012, Siteserv owed 150 million to IRBC, and in the same year, IRBC sold Siteserv for 45 million. As our motion states, some bidders were excluded from the sale, external trade buyers excluded from the sale of Siteserv, and of course, the major concern by many people is the fact that Siteserv shareholders received €5 million at the time of the sale. So I think we need to have this fully independent commission to examine the circumstances surrounding the sale of Siteserv and indeed other company sell-offs by IRBC so that the interests of the taxpayer can be fully protected and transparent. Just refer to what the Taoiseach John Burton TD said, and I quote, "I want to see all of the relevant information made available and published." I wonder, do other members of the Cabinet share the Taoiseach's views? Do all the various authorities agree with the Taoiseach? Because certainly that does not seem to be the case. Deputy Catherine Murphy asked in a parliamentary question Minister Noonan if he was aware of share acquisitions may have arisen as a result of privileged information in relation to the sale and what the Irish Stock Exchange had done by way of investigation. And indeed, the reply was, I understand that the Department does not have a role in investigating allegations of insider trading. So we see both the Minister and the Central Bank saying it's a matter for the regulator of the market, in other words, the Irish Stock Exchange, and yet we don't really get a reply. I was interested in what the Sunday Times reported when they asked the Office of the Director of Corporate Enforcement if it had ever investigated allegations of insider dealing at Siteserv. It said not policy to comment. So again, no reply. And given this controversy, the shareholders getting €5 million payout, taxpayer taking €105 million loss, there is a clear public interest argument whether the share trading was ever the subject of an investigation. So certainly, I just want to say that this is where we need a full investigation. If you're going to have a review into this,
you have 1 minute.
Come on. If we're going to have a review of this, most commentators are saying that it's not appropriate that KMPG would carry out this investigation, because this company was one of the financial advisors to Siteserv when it was sold for 45 million in April 2012. Surely the purpose of the review should be to restore confidence in the manner in which deals involving huge amounts of public money were conducted by IRBC. The government and the minister, I think, have missed an opportunity by not having an independent commission. In fact, this is a classic kicking for touch. And I think many people have questioned now, could an issue like this happen again? Would the Department of Finance be fully kept informed if there was another sale process? I wonder, can freedom of information requests continue during this investigation? I just finished clearly by quoting Professor David Farrell, UCD Professor of Politics, who said that the controversy highlights two major weaknesses in our political system. Number one, a government that is not held properly to account by Parliament is now taking place. And secondly, a mindset that privileges secrecy over openness.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Colin Keaveney, and the Deputy's 10 minutes.
Chairperson, the Moriarty Tribunal report delivered early in 2011, almost simultaneously with the formation of the current government. It contained very serious findings against two named individuals, a former Fine Gael minister and a prominent businessman. Chairperson, there was much pious rhetoric in this House about a hullabaloo and what was going to be done in the next 4 years, the programme for government. But one of the key commitments in the programme for government was going to be a democratic revolution. The public were reassured this democratic revolution. It was proclaimed to ensure that there would be accountability, transparency, and that the sins of the past would never happen again. And as with much else over the course of the last 4 years, Chairperson, the government parties mistook the sayings and doings of government. They took them for granted, and what you've done is that you've insisted that we judge you on your words and not on, indeed, your intentions, or you've ignored your actual commitments with respect to particularly the most vulnerable people. And within months of taking office, the government oversaw the beginning of several significant sales of state assets through contracts within the IBRC, writing down large amounts of debt, initially indirectly to the state's own citizens. And many of these dealings involved a businessman named in the tribunal report in 2011 that constituted, in my view, a profound failure of government, a failure of public policy, a failure of constitutional policy that resulted in a lack of prudence, a lack of oversight by this government with respect to re-engagement 1 month after the publication of the Moriarty report. I mean, Chairperson, why was the state, under the government, being permitted to involve itself again in dealing with a named person in the Moriarty tribunal? One can't fault a businessman for wanting to make a profit, but you have to fault a government for failing to have the proper oversight. This is a government who accepted the terms of the Moriarty tribunal. It's once bitten, but twice shy. What we have seen, Chairperson, is something that's far from shy. We can all remember the Taoiseach proudly standing for photo opportunities with that same business person. And we still see a situation where ministers, particularly in the Fine Gael ministries, were happy to oversee a situation where their departments were critical in overseeing deals with respect to the changes in society and the offloading of assets through IBRC. And, you know, you can see it here tonight. I know the backbenchers in government are very sensitive around, you know, literally, you know, allusions around words and commitments, and they tread very carefully around that. There's a famous incident, Chairperson, in the Sherlock Holmes book, The Curious Incident of the Dog of the Night. But, you know, what we see here is the silence of a bark of a dog, and we've seen it too many times. We see it again. Every incident, it involves a failure of the dog to bark, to stop, to make sure that this didn't happen again. And you can't be surprised. You cannot be surprised with the actions of Fine Gael. They act according to their nature, to their instinct. The fable of the scorpion and the frog, it comes to mind immediately. You know, incidentally, Labour should realise that they are the frog and the scorpion is stinging them on this one. And it's clearly, you know, the scorpion will drop the frog when the scorpion has injected its poison. The last Fine Gael Labour government saw the single biggest act of corruption in the history of the state, where a state asset acquired through corruption ended up massively in the control of one businessman in this country. At that time, the Labour dog failed to bark, and history is repeating itself here tonight. Repeating itself. Siteserv owed €150 million to IBRC. That is to say that they owed €150 million indirectly to the state and to its citizens. And it was eventually sold at a discount, resulting in €45 million as part of that sale. Curiously, €5 million was incentivised to ensure that that sale took place with the current bidder. The Department of Finance were mystified at the time. They were mystified about the €5 million. They were concerned about it, and that's documented, and clearly it is evidenced in this House. Other bidders were excluded from the process. That included bidders who were prepared to bid more, and in fact, they were excluded in terms of the engagement of the state bid, and there was a 10 or 15 million euro additional in that bid. And that is not understood in this House to be a prudential political oversight. The successful bidder, we are told, was favoured because he was willing to waive any due diligence to effectively buy the company on the blind. It's extraordinary to me that a company should be willing, you know, to spend €45 million on a pig and a poke, a company that was flatlining, a penny stock. Of course, it turned out to be a very fortuitous purchase. In fact, it was a significant blind sale that was, you know, a wonderful gamble. And Chairperson, I know you're prone to the odd gamble, but this is one of the best gambles, blind sales in this country, and this is a company that landed on its feet. No due diligence, put €45 million on the table, kicked back €5 million to the shareholders. Of course, Siteserv, you know, it is only one company of many that were sold off. And Chairperson, IBRC, questions are now being raised with respect to other deals that took place. And that's why it's critical that we have a full, open commission of investigation, because the Minister will no doubt continue to prevaricate in and around answering questions. I was alarmed to hear Catherine Murphy raise over the course of the weekend that the possibility of trying to secure FOI data over the course of the next number of months is highly unlikely as a consequence of the construct of this Mediop investigation. And all of this, unfortunately, Labour has turned its blind eye, and it's done it before. It's done it before prior to, as a result of a significant decision around state assets. So you can't continue to keep your hands clean. It simply isn't possible because the public are aware of what's happening, and you cannot, by omitting or absenting yourself from this discussion, but wash your hands from the sins of what's happening here and turning a blind eye to IBRC in the context of what is clearly the creation of a Fine Gael baby. Because Labour, you turned a blind eye to the construct of IBRC. It was a monster. It became unaccountable. And it was the Minister for Finance who was the significant shareholder who, by default, hid behind a monster. You cannot, in government, turn a blind eye to this situation tonight, and I would appeal to the Labour Party to grow a pair and stand up for decency with respect to that. Because really, at the end of the day, we would have seen, you know, Deputy Rabbit murmur alarm. He would have had conniptions on this side of the House. And the only conniption we've seen with respect to his actions was, in any serious way, was to control the dominance of one business owner in this country with respect to private print and broadcast media by the state. It's not in any way a slang or a negative comment to the journalists who work in this House. They're some of the finest people. I know them. But they must find it very difficult to file copy tonight with respect to reporting on this case. The Taoiseach, she made the noises on Siteserv. She was calling for the relevant information about the sale to be placed into public domain. She seemed at times to be in favour of an inquiry. Instead, however, she has quietly gone along with the farce the Fine Gael are now proposing. That involves a massive conflict of interest for a body being called in to review the conflict of interest because they are in the middle of that conflict of interest themselves. It's absolutely disgraceful. And again, there is nothing surprising when it comes to Fine Gael because, you know, you are abusing Labour's position in this respect. And again, we're learning the hard way in Irish politics because Labour are quite content to go along with the right-wing instincts of a government and the right-wing instincts of a party who are, on a second time in my generation, who are going to enrich the richest people in this country by arranging these sort of deals. And this is on a morning that, you know, we see a situation where the budget, in this context of the low-income earners, that the Cabinet will meet tonight to put attachment orders on families who are struggling day in, day out on social protection.
1 minute.
People who can't pay their bills, including Irish Water, will have it directly taken from their welfare, regardless of the impact on that family. So those who have a financial interest in Irish Water will be hoping that that decision will go down well tonight, because, you know, Irish Water desperately needs a reassurance with respect to Eurostat on how they're going to secure the revenue. And it will come at any cost, and any cost means carpet bombing the most vulnerable people in society, those who exist on social protection, lone parents, those who have a few bob at the end of the week just to survive. They are the people who are going to be centre to a decision in Cabinet tonight about cuts to their child benefits, cuts to their under-26 social protection, cuts that the Labour Party were promising to commit to be safeguarding against those decisions in government. And tonight, this motion offers Labour the opportunity to redeem themselves. Support a fully independent inquiry. The Siteserv sale of other companies, the sale of IBRC, all of the transactions that have taken place needs an independent commission. Chairperson,
Thanks,
I'd like to commend the proposer of the motion, Deputy Fleming.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Catherine Murphy, and Deputy has 10 minutes.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to thank Fianna Fáil for tabling this motion and for allocating me some of their speaking time. While Siteserv is at the centre of this controversy, it's part of a wider set of issues. I want to, in the first instance, briefly refer to an article in the Sunday Times from last Sunday. In summer 2011, it states, around the same time as the decision was made to sell Siteserv, Sierra Support Services, a Siteserv subsidiary, started preparing a bid for contracts to install water meters. Siteserv already had a contract with Bord Gas to service boilers. According to the Sierra's managing director, the company began hiring water meter specialists in mid-2011. Remember, Siteserv was a company that was hemorrhaging cash. It owed IBRC and the taxpayer $150 million, and yet here it was planning for the future involving our water metering. On July the 26th, 2013, a Sierra joint venture, GMC Sierra, won 3 contracts to install water meters for Irish Water, worth 62 million each. To understand it, you have to go back to June 2011, when a sales process for Siteserv, led by Siteserv itself rather than an examiner, was commenced. IBRC really took a hands-off approach despite being owed 150 million. A sales team was assembled. This comprised of Walter Hobbs, 4 Siteserv executives and board members, Davy Corporate Finance and KPMG. Somewhere along the way, a decision was made to exclude trade buyers. 50 candidates were whittled down to 9 expressions of interest in November 2011. On the 11th of November 2011, those interested parties were contacted and asked to sign a confidentiality agreements. Once they were signed, an information pack about Siteserv was sent to potential bidders. This allowed for due diligence. And there was a deadline of the 5th of December, or the 7th of December at 5 p.m, and that was 2011. Remember that date, the 7th of December 2011, because it is important. Parties are informed that the sales team want the entire process to be concluded by mid-January, so it was quite hasty. We now know that Millington, who was the eventual bidder, was not incorporated until the 7th of December 2011. So given that the entity did not exist, how could it have undertaken the 3 weeks due diligence period required of the other bidders? Millington could not have signed a confidentiality agreement in November 2011, nor could it have received a Siteserv information pack, because it did not exist at the time. So if Millington was able to make a bid later in the process than all other bids, how did it come by the information it needed to make the bid? Because these things are not made on the back of an envelope. Who gave it the information? It is possible that Millington used a proxy, perhaps Ireland, to obtain that information on behalf of Millington. If so, how does that sit with confidentiality agreements? So given that Millington only came into existence in December the 7th, the same day as the deadline for the first round of bids, how can we find out how soon after that Millington actually made a bid? Did that bid follow the 16-point checklist required of the other bids, or was it a 3-page submission that Mr Dukes referred to when he confirms that Mr O'Brien had advanced knowledge of the sale?
You mustn't use people's names outside the House, please.
Various sources involved in the process have indicated to me that they always felt that all bidders were not playing from the same starting line. In the information pack sent to prospective bidders who had signed confidentiality agreements, it stated that it should be assumed that the company will be acquired on a debt-free and cash-free basis. Yet, I have had indications, and strong indications, that when Siteserv was sold to Millington, it actually had 10 million on the balance sheet, a combination of cash and debtors. That has to be inquired into. We know now that Millington paid 40 million to IBRC and 5 million went to the shareholders of Siteserv in order to get them to agree the deal. Yet others involved in the process were clearly saying they'd have paid more. Indeed, Altrad, when their person turned up at the shareholders meeting on the 5th of April 2012, Altrad were a trade buyer who were excluded from the bidding process, and they commented they were wondering about the confidentiality aspect of it. And they said, if you look at any of the acquisitions that we've made, we keep everything in total confidence. He went on to dismiss claims by Siteserv that there was only a slim chance that Altrad would stick with the higher bid. The reality is, and this is quoting him, that with the synergies we'd have with Siteserv, 60 million would have been a low bid. That was our opening bid. If they'd allowed an open fight, as we see it, where they've allowed in people with synergy, then I think we could have gone well beyond 60 million. Another point that leads to questions is the share activity. At the start of November 2011, the share price for Siteserv was 3.5 cents. Yet over the course of the month, as the supposed confidential process intensifies, the purchasing of Siteserv shareholders of shares increases by 53-fold. The review the Minister has commissioned is to be undertaken by Kieran Wallace of KPMG. It cannot be considered as an independent, no matter how much you try to stretch the imagination. They led the sale. They represented personal interests of many of the key players involved in the sale, and Kieran Wallace himself actually led the liquidation of Siteserv plc. The Siteserv Special Liquidations Report was signed off by him, and he was the one that distributed the 5 million to the shareholders when it was formally signed off on. A map of almost all of the key players in Siteserv saga leads back to one place, and that's KPMG. Let me read you a list. The chairman of Siteserv during the sale is a consultant and company director with KPMG. Robert Dix, a non-executive director at Siteserv, was a partner in KPMG. You have to be able to create these links.
Please don't.
The independent person appointed by IBRC was himself a former director of IBRC. The person who acted for Davy in the sale, who now works at the Department of Finance as shareholder management unit in the Department of Finance, was a former KPMG employee. And KPMG, Kieran Walsh and Eamon Richardson were sued by Mike Ainsley, Tom Hewson and Richard Woodhouse following the winding up of IBRC. KPMG's own global code of conduct states specifically that they must maintain independence and objectivity and avoid actual or perceived conflicts of interest. By having KPMG undertake this process, it has undermined the process right from the word go. And of course, KPMG acts for the person who owned the process as auditor in Topaz, Communication Core, Communicore, INM and Beacon. There are other elements of the Siteserv transaction that need to be explored and which the terms of the review don't cover. For example, in the Sunday Independent, they asked the CEO at the shareholders' meeting on the 15th, CEO of Siteserv, on the 5th of April 2012, whether the CEO had significant personal borrowings from IBRC. I think it is essential that any inquiry take a look at how those loans played out after the process, after a significant amount was paid to him. The ultimate buyer of Siteserv was one of the largest debtors of IBRC. His loans had expired and had apparently written to Kieran Wallace in his role as special liquidator, seeking the same terms IBRC had allowed him, which was to pay off his loans in his own time at low interest rates. When a loan expires, you expect a penalty to be put onto it, not a discount. My understanding is that it was costing IBRC 7% for their money, significantly higher than the 1% NAMA were borrowing at. Even if Dennis O'Brien's loans were eventually paid off in
I've asked
full,
you 3 times not to mention names.
The interest rate represented a subsidy. I can't understand why this is not a factor, given that more money would have had to be borrowed to purchase the company. As I understand it, it was the state-owned AIB that put up the money for the purchase of Siteserv to Billington. And I've got to say, I find that really an astonishing part of this. So surely it's clear that the proposed review is not only conflicted, it is simply not, it's just not wide enough to give a true picture. And KPMG should really recuse themselves from the process, because I think it will damage their own reputation. I mean, there's a whole lot more I'd love to say, but we need an independent review. This is not an independent review, and it's essential that one is held. Thank you.
Deputy Charles McConnell, and you have 4 minutes left in the slot.
And wish to commend the motion to the House here tonight, and thank Deputy Fleming for proposing it, and indeed also commend Deputy Murphy for the work that she has conducted on this, which has been very important in actually bringing it to a head and bringing public attention on it. And I think, Minister, the public have a right to be concerned as to the way the government are going about dealing with this issue and ensuring that there's a proper investigation to assess what has happened and to give confidence that that everything was above board, and to make sure that that actually was the case. Unfortunately, the government have not done that. And there is an often used quote in justice and law, Minister, and that is that justice must not just seem to be done, or must just not be done, it must also be seen to be done. And I think in that key principle, the government is starting off on a very poor footing in relation to this. Much was made, and I mean, made by earlier speakers here tonight in relation to the decision and the move by this government to introduce a new framework, operation framework between the government and IBRC. And indeed, a lot of attacks were made on Fianna Fáil and on members on this side of the House. And I have to say, when speakers become so adamant in terms of shooting the messenger, you wonder, you start to wonder and understand that they must have a particularly big problem with the message. Minister for Finance then, in his own speech here tonight, indicated that the revised relationship framework and operational protocol, which was agreed, actually was brought in because it was a condition of Ireland's third review under the EU-IMF programme of financial support. So, despite all your backbenchers here tonight lauding the government for it, we see actually in the Minister's own speech that the rationale for it was that the EU-IMF told you that you should do it and made it a condition. So in relation to following on from the agreement of that operational protocol, IBRC were then required to provide certain documentation and consult with the government on big decisions. And we see that immediately following on from the agreement of the protocol, they forwarded a number of board documentations to the government, for example, on the 20th of March, 21st of March, and following on from there. But the meeting at which the Siteserv deal was done was 5 days before they started providing the information. Again, Minister, that raises questions which I believe need to be answered, and there needs to be confidence restored. Minister Noonan, again in his speech tonight, indicated that the reason why he's appointing KPMG, who are the special liquidators, and in his own words, he said they're best placed to undertake such a review thoroughly and expeditiously, given their access to all books and records of IBRC. Now, I mean, if you were to use that rationale, Minister, then you would, you'd allow each company to audit themselves because they already have their own books. I mean, that's no reason to be deciding who should be appointed as an auditor or who should be appointed to conduct an investigation. It indeed defies logic. Again, Minister Noonan, at the end of his speech, comments, depending on the findings of the review, further investigations will be initiated as and if appropriate. Well, I think, Minister, what needs to happen is a proper investigation needs to be conducted at the outset to restore confidence and indeed ensure that the public interest was served in this regard. IBRC, when it became IBRC, €30 billion worth of funds it had. By the time it was liquidated, there was €13 billion. Each and every one of those decisions, if there is question marks over them, there needs to be a genuine mechanism in place to actually ensure and assure the public and give confidence that decisions were made in the interest of the public. Unfortunately, the oft-quoted remark we hear from the Taoiseach in relation to Paddy likes to know what's going on has not been a hallmark of how this government has conducted its business. And we're seeing that again, unfortunately, in your approach to this issue. And unfortunately, Minister, it is not what the public require, or indeed what a genuine government who's genuinely addressing an issue should be delivering.
Thanks, Deputy Minister. Paddy Coffey, and the Minister has 5 minutes.
Thank you, Las Cahirlock. First of all, I'd like to thank all deputies who have made a contribution into this evening's discussions. And having listened to them and to the debate, the Minister for Finance is of the view that there is some common ground on both sides of the House in this matter. We are agreed to various degrees that in light of the recent concerns raised before the House of the Oireachtas and elsewhere regarding the Siteserv transaction and the public discourse this has caused surrounding the handling of other transactions undertaken by IBRC, a review into certain transactions is needed to serve the public interest. This review and subsequent report will evaluate whether there is any evidence of material deficiencies in the performance of their functions by those acting on behalf of IBRC, including the board, directors, management, employees and agents of IBRC, and whether it can be concluded that any of the transactions were not commercially sound. the Minister for Finance has directed the Special Liquidators of IBRC to review certain transactions which occurred between the 21st of January 2009, the date of the nationalisation of IBRC, and February the 7th, 2013, the date of the appointment of the Special Liquidators to IBRC. The review will cover transactions that resulted in a capital loss to IBRC of at least €10 million during that period, or are specifically identified by the Special Liquidator as likely to give rise to potential public concern in respect of the ultimate returns to the taxpayer. It is expected that there will be at least 30 transactions which will fall under the scope of this review. The Minister for Finance wants to stress that the commission of this review and report is to serve the public interest in light of recent speculation and is not being undertaken as a result of any evidence that such deficiencies existed or that transactions were not commercially sound. The motion before the House tonight seeks to derail the review process already set up. Some members of the House have suggested that the Special Liquidators should not have been appointed to undertake this review. The Minister is strongly of the view that the Special Liquidators are best placed to undertake such a review thoroughly and expeditiously, given their access to all books and records of IBRC, the resources at their disposal to conduct such a review, and the power set out under the IBRC Act, which allows the Minister for Finance to make this direction in the public interest. As the Minister said, in order to manage and/or mitigate against any actual or perceived conflicts of interest, he has directed, with the agreement of the Special Liquidators, that retired High Court Judge Justice Iarla O'Neill monitor any actual or perceived conflict of interest with the review. The Minister for Finance is confident that this will ensure that the review process is robust and addresses concerns for the other side of the House surrounding possible conflicts of interest. The Minister would like to thank the deputies for this constructive and helpful debate and assure them that the review process into certain transactions in IBRC, which the Special Liquidators have been engaged to conduct, will be conducted in a professional manner with any actual or perceived conflict of interest, with the review being monitored by retired High Court Judge Justice Iarla O'Neill. This report will be available on the 31st of August 2015 and will be made available to relevant committees of the Oireachtas at that stage. Gormagat.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Billy Kelleher, and the Deputy is 5 minutes.
I just say I welcome the opportunity to speak on this particular issue. It's of huge public interest, Minister. And I have to say, from the commentary on the government side today, you would believe that there's nothing in this at all that's worth exploring, and that we're going to establish some form of investigation to see what's happening inside there, if anything is happening at all. When the alarm bells are ringing, Minister, and the alarm bells have been ringing for some time in the Department of Finance itself, and there was concerns expressed about this particular deal. Now, it also has to be said, there is no point in pretending here that you're an open, transparent government. It had to be dragged for media information, and Deputy Catherine Murphy has done the state some service in terms of doggedly pursuing this particular issue. And we wouldn't be establishing any form of investigation, and it would be swept under the carpet only for that tenacity. And I can remember, Minister, in 1995, when allegations were made that a minister was paid substantial sums of money to facilitate the granting of a mobile licence, and the people that made those allegations were excoriated, and a tribunal was established, and it did find that a politician was paid substantial sums of money, and it did find that Dennis O'Brien. It is named in a tribunal that was lodged before this particular Parliament, and I'm entitled to name without unequivocation that particular fact. And it states quite clearly in the tribunal report that payments were made to facilitate the granting of a mobile licence. And I'll tell you, Minister, what happened. Nothing. We have tribunal reports that high inside in our offices, every deputy, gathering dust, some of us standing up and taking envelopes out of their shelves. But nothing has happened. And that's why the public are angry. The public are angry, Minister, because they feel that there's something here and they want to know the truth. So let's have the truth. And the only way that can come about is by a cold-blooded, clinical commission of investigation into this particular transaction. Because there are lots of things in this transaction that ordinary people cannot understand. I, to this day, still can't understand how shareholders in a bus company would be paid nearly €5 million. I can't understand why, if there was confidentiality everywhere, that share transactions would all of a sudden take on a new meaning. This company was going nowhere, and all of a sudden, share transactions at a rapid pace and an inflated price. So those two things alone would suggest that there was issues around it. But what I find most amazing in all of this is that we move on a small bit further. The involvement of Sierra in the installation of water meters, and the fact that they were able to do due diligence, start up recruitment of personnel before any contracts were awarded, simply beggars belief that something or somebody didn't know something. And I can't accept, Minister, that you can sit here on your hands and pretend that you're going to establish this investigation, and that if there's potential conflicts of interest, well, retired Justice Iarla O'Neill will step in. The very fact that you're appointing a former justice to oversee potential conflicts of interest would suggest that there's conflicts of interest all over the place. And at the heart of it, let's be very clear, KPMG is right in the middle of it at every hand's turn. And now they're being asked to investigate themselves, to oversee the overall investigation, the special liquidator. I mean, Minister, at some stage you have to understand that the anger that's being expressed on this side of the House is not the anger of a number of TDs trying to point score. This goes to the very heart and principle of what this Parliament is about. It is about ensuring that people's rights are upheld, and the public have a duty to know the full truth in terms of this issue, because at the heart of it all is writing off of taxpayers' money. 100 million was written off, Minister. And that is the kernel of the issue. And at the same time, as already was pointed out, Cabinet is meeting to put attachment orders on people who are on the breadline already. And at the same time, they see or seen companies or people riding off into the sunset, picking the carcass of this state. And that simply is not good enough. And as I said, people made allegations in 1995, and they were excoriated for making them. A tribunal was established, and it had findings. Nothing has happened. And are we to say here in 2015 that allegations were made, concerns were expressed, and a sham investigation was established to sweep this under the carpet? It would be shameful, Minister, and you should do something about it. Support this motion and ensure that the public have confidence in this investigation.
Thanks, Deputy. Deputy Dara Calleary, and the Deputy has 5 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. 2 weeks ago, we stood and we debated in this chamber the plight of SMEs across the country, and one of the issues we highlighted during that occasion, and was highlighted on all sides of the House, was the difficulties that are still there for SMEs to get finance, and in particular the cohort of SMEs whose banks are exiting the market, whose loans are being sold to foreign investment funds, for whom there is no protection, for whom there is limited finance. And the lack of urgency about the government around that and around extending the credit guarantee scheme and constantly long-fingering it while jobs are being lost because of that long-fingering is absolutely exposed when you look at the €5 million that went to the shareholders in an effectively insolvent company. Many SMEs are being told they're not solvent, and that's why they're not getting bank credit, that they got too much in the so-called good days. And they look on and they see 5 million given to shareholders, they see 100 million write-off for this company involved. They see an utterly dysfunctional relationship between the IBRC and the Department of Finance. And they try to understand and they try to wonder how they are in their position, how they are exposed in their position, and how nobody in government really gives a damn. Nobody in government really gives a damn while jobs are gone out the door, while there's no finance in place, while banks still rule the roost. And yet then they see this reluctance and this absolute no way on the part of the government towards establishing an independent commission. Minister, you said we'll have a report from Judge O'Neill on the 31st of August 2015. How suitable. Just in time for the budget, when everybody will be talking about the budget, and then we all know what we'll all be talking about after the budget. You hope that by delivering it at the end of the summer that nobody will ask questions. The Minister Noonan said that depending on the findings of that review, further investigations will happen if appropriate. Who decides if it's appropriate? Does this House decide, or is it the Minister that decides? The Minister who's been dragged kicking, screaming at every touch, at every angle into this debate. We saw the mask of this Minister slip spectacularly last Thursday on the Sean O'Rourke show, We saw the pressure he is under around this. And this is actually, for me, what this whole issue exposes more than anything. The cosmetic nature and the spin nature of this government towards political reform. Why is it that Deputy Catherine Murphy, and why is it that every single deputy in this House, when they put down a parliamentary question, frankly needs a degree in English to be able to phrase the question in a way to get the information you require? There are not many people that would have the tenacity to go back 16, 17 or 18 times in the way Deputy Murphy has. And for